I'm going to read you a story. It is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Stories are powerful. Stories entertain us. A wedding reception is successful because Jesus turned water into wine. On its very surface, that is an entertaining story. Stories also help us to imagine how we would behave if we were part of the story. We may, listening to that story, consider what we would do if we were at a party and the wine ran out. Stories can teach us. From the examples of the characters, we learn what to do and what not to do if we care enough to want the very best. In this story, we see Mary approach Jesus with a concern. We see Jesus dismiss her concern at first, as sons and children sometimes do with their mothers. We see Mary wisely not insisting on an action. We imagine that Jesus then reconsidered what Mary had observed. And we see that Mary, trusting that Jesus will act, paves the way for success by telling the servants to follow Jesus's instructions. After reconsidering, we see Jesus take action, directing the servants to fill the jars of water to their very as full as you can make it. So we see Jesus taking action. We also then see Jesus not to take any credit for the success. So, as I said, from stories we can learn. From Mary, we learn to speak up, to back up, and to ease the way. From Jesus, we learn that although our first reaction is often to resist a new idea, that we want to be open to reconsidering that idea before we dismiss it completely. And then we act. And when the results are successful, we stay humble. Stories can teach us. We can also see stories as metaphors, where the characters and aspects of the story can represent something else. For example, the water can represent our everyday comfort zone, the place where we're comfortable and everything is okay. The wine can represent something which adds life and excitement to our everyday life. And in this story, we can imagine Mary, who knows that her son is ready to step into something greater. We can imagine her making this observation about the wine. Jesus, who knows that if he acts, he would make a difference. Jesus insists, though, that he is not ready. We can imagine ourselves as Mary, the person who sees the potential for something greater in someone else. And we can imagine ourselves in Jesus's position, not ready to step out of our comfort zone. We turn water into wine then because we step into that greatness despite our discomfort or our fear or our sense of not being ready. And when we act, we discover the joy of adding to the party. And so we can see the story as a metaphor for adding to the party of life. And so, metaphor. If you want to hear a bit more in-depth summary of these observations, there's a previous talk entitled "When You Care Enough to Want the Very Best" that you might find of interest, where we speak metaphorically and literally about what we can learn from this story. And today I want to talk about an even deeper way of interpreting stories. It is called metaphysical interpretation. When we interpret metaphysically, we look at the story from a completely different angle. We see the people, the places, and the events in the story as representations of aspects of ourselves, things that we can find within ourselves. Sometimes metaphysical interpretation can be quite challenging. So what I found works for me, and maybe it would work for you, is to put the words "in us" after each element of the story. So if an event happens, then that event happens in us. Characters are characters within us. Places are places within us. So what do we discover when we look at the metaphysical interpretation of Jesus's first miracle? That idea of changing water to wine. We discover that we can change water into wine and add to the celebration of life when we direct our thoughts in an intentional way. We also can learn that if we aren't intentional with our thoughts, then our enjoyment of life, our life spark, if you will, can feel depleted. We learn that we are the director of our thoughts, and it is up to us to direct our thoughts in a way that fills, replenishes, and refreshes us, so that when we are filled, we add to the celebration that life is. And yes, all of these discoveries are found in this story if we look at it in a metaphysical way. First, I want to note that this miracle happens at a wedding. A wedding represents the coming together in complete acceptance, in complete love of two unique entities who, when married, form something whole, perfect, new. Again, think of events as being events in us. And so what is the marriage in us? Well, we could think of marriage in us as the perfect union of our humanity with our divinity, perhaps, or a union of our childhood zest for life, combining and integrating with our adult sense of responsibility. Maybe it would be the balance between aspects of ourselves that we like and the parts that we don't like. Marriage represents acceptance, appreciation, welcoming of the different parts of ourselves. And as we integrate all of who we are, we worry less. We judge ourselves less. Our lives become more expansive, more forgiving of ourselves and others. When all of the parts of us are able to come together in a spirit of love and acceptance that is united in a marriage, that is a sacred joining worthy of celebration. So the wedding celebration in the story is our life. And the wine is our life spark, our energy, our joy, the substance which adds juiciness, if you will, to our life. The guests at the wedding celebration had already been given wine as part of the celebration. We arrive as guests on this planet with life, with the natural tendency for joy and delight and fun. Just as the guests were given wine, so the wine, the joy of life, is already given to us when we arrive here on planet Earth. But just like the wine at the wedding, as we grow old, as we grow older, as life gets in the way, sometimes it is true that our spark, our wine, runs out. And life isn't as much fun as it used to be. It's not the party that it was when we were children. And so we want to replenish our spark so that life can be a celebration again. We want to create more wine in us. And we do that by working with water, by working with the substance that became wine. And if you think literally about water, you'll recognize that water is life-giving. It is clear, almost invisible, with no taste. But with no water, there is no life. And think about it. Almost every liquid which we drink has water as its base. In science, water is considered the universal solvent because it can do so much. It is pure potential. It is ready to clean. It is ready to heal. It is ready to transform into something more flavorful, more energizing, more juicy, more interesting. In the story, water, pure potential, is transformed into something with a higher essence, that life essence represented by wine. And what we know in life is that water takes on the flavor of whatever is added to it. And so in the story, water in us represents our potential, the possibilities for our life. It represents our ability to form and transform our life. And of course, to add more joy to life, we want to transform our water into something tasty and enjoyable, represented by wine. And we see Mary and Jesus, mother and child, in relationship with one another. Mary is the wisdom and intuition in us, the part of us which recognizes that the juice has run out of the party, that something is missing in our lives. Mary is the part of us that knows that something could be done. And Mary is the energy which goes to the Jesus part of us for insight. So Mary represents intuition. Something's missing, and I have an idea. Jesus in us represents that highest expression of ourselves, the spiritual director, if you will, the ultimate expression of love in action. And Jesus represents our awareness that we are holy. Jesus represents all that we long to express in human form. And so Jesus works with Mary. Our intuition and wisdom work with love to direct the servants. And what about those servants? Well, the servants filled 6 jars with water. The water then was transformed into wine. Well, the servants in us are our thoughts. They are our abilities. And the jars are where the results of our actions are formed and transformed. Without deliberate action, the flavor of the water coming out of the jars may be bland and unexciting. The result of our life energy may be bland and unexciting. But when we direct our thoughts, our servants, with an intention to add to the excitement and interest and juice of life, when we want to add wine, then in the field of unlimited potential, transformation will happen. The jars of water will be changed into jars of wine. It is as if from the universal solvent of infinite possibilities, our thoughts and ideas flavor the water which colors our lives. And the thing that we want to keep in mind is this: the servants in us, our thoughts, are always active. We always fill our minds with thoughts. And with those thoughts, the water of our life can be flavored sweetly or sourly. It is up to us to direct our thoughts. The Jesus of us directs our thoughts. And then with the thoughts that we choose, our jars of water can produce a flavor that adds to the joy and contentment of our lives, adds to the party, if you will. Or with the thoughts we choose, we can diminish and detract from our joy and contentment. And we know this in everyday language. We know this in our everyday experience. We say things like, what you see is what you get, or change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. We hear it as the power of positive thinking, or garbage in, garbage out, or ideas lead to experiences, or the law of attraction. We, as the Jesus part of us, can direct our thoughts, filling jars of water with positivity, with intention for the most loving experience of humanity we can be. And that way we create an outward flow of wine, juicy, good quality, better quality than anyone ever expected. So let us remember to let that Jesus part of us, the part which is spiritually aware and aware of our power, the power of thought. Let us remember to let that Jesus part of us be in charge of our thoughts, so that we intend only the finest. When we care enough to want the very best, we can direct our thought servants and fill our jars with intention and attention to what we're putting in. When we put in an intention for joy and love and peace and contentment and gentleness, then what will emerge will be full-bodied, flavorful, revitalizing, and add to the party. Another thing that you may have noticed is that the steward in the story, the wine steward presumably, noticed the difference in the quality of the wine. And he had never considered the possibility that there could be finer wine at the end of the party. The steward notices the difference. He can tell that there has been a significant shift, that now is different from before, that now is finer, more flavorful than the past, more joyful. He wants to know what happened. In our lives, we may find that exact thing happening, where as we shift, as we direct our servants to put fine things into our jars of water, that the output, the wine, will be finer and more flavorful than ever before. Our lives will change. And people may ask us what our secret is. They may want to know what happened. When they see that rather than winding down because we are aging, we see that instead that this is the best that life has been, that we are actually continuing to enjoy the juice of life. That is the beauty of transformation, is that we don't need to force it on anyone. They can see it and wonder and ask us. It also tells us that it's never, ever too late to shift and to change our direction of our thoughts. All we need to do is direct the servants as Jesus did and fill the jars abundantly with the input that will create this wonderful, wonderful wine, this wonderful life experience. So how do we do that? What are some practical ways that we can direct our servants, that we can direct the thoughts that we use to create our experience? Well, there were 6 jars. And so much of what I played with is the idea of things in 6s. And so I just offer some ideas to you. First, before I do that, I want you to think in terms of thoughts being there to serve you, that you are the director of your thoughts. And you may know my unity principles sung to the happy birthday song, and then the backwards second verse of that, which is, if peace isn't there, take time to be still and question your thinking. What other ideas could add more peace? Why am I singing that? Because this whole idea of directing your thoughts is to question your thinking. If the output of the jars is not pleasant, it's not peaceful, it's not joyful, then we need to redirect, or want to redirect our servants, our thoughts, into other ideas which could add more peace. We want to be in the driver's seat, the Jesus part of us, the spiritual director part of us, the part of us that knows that we are wise and divine and powerful beyond our understanding, will know that we want to be intentional and pay attention to the ingredients that we're putting into our water jar. So here are a few ideas. I mentioned again that I like the idea of doing things in 6s. First, take 6 minutes a day to rest in appreciation for all that you have in your life. 6 minutes a day. Or write 6 things that you take for granted. What 6 things can you think of that are easy to overlook, that seem bland, that seem kind of lifeless and waterless? See what juice you can get when you recognize how fortunate you are to have those things that you take for granted in your life. And then related to that, consider maybe writing 6 things that you found delightful today. 6 things that brought you joy and contentment today. Give away 6 things. Give away 6 things in 6 days. Play with this idea of filling 6. Do something just for you for 6 minutes. Take a walk around the block. Okay, maybe it'll be a little longer than 6 minutes, but you get the idea. Read a book for 6 minutes. Close your eyes for 6 minutes and just enjoy silence. Take 6 deep breaths. Recite a mantra or an affirmation or a prayer 6 times a day. When you wake up, after breakfast, after lunch, in the middle of the afternoon with your afternoon tea or coffee, after dinner, at bedtime, or maybe before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner. 6 times a day, bring yourself into a place where you are intentional about your thinking. When you care enough to want the very best, celebrate the life spark that you were given, and recognize that you want to cultivate and expand that spark into something that remains bright and beautiful. When you notice that the spark is fading, be like Mary and take your wisdom and intuition to the Jesus part of yourself, that highest part of you. And then from that higher part of you, take action and direct your thoughts so that the jars of possibility are filled with ingredients to produce fine, flavorful, full-bodied wine. When you care enough to want the very best, your thoughts will help you turn water into wine and add to the juice of life. I bless you.